Obviously, I didn't prune this last year, but it grew 2 shoots right there. I pruned it right there. You can see the cut 2 years ago. It grew this branch. It also set those branches. Because see, all the energies in the root is coming here, growing this. When I cut this off, all that energy went into here. And then it will go into your fruiting spurs, which is what you're after. But see, I cut this off so we could get by here, because I ride a lawnmower here cutting the grass. So I cut that off, and now it's grown out here in two years. That was 1 year growth to that little knot. It just split into 2 pieces, so it's not one big long one. And it grew that much the first year after I made the cut. In my way of thinking, it's going to keep doing the same thing. So I'm going to take it back to here, and I'm going to cut that off, and that will be my main branch. And since I want lateral branches coming out the side, I'm going to cut the end off of this one. I'm going to cut the end off of all of these. Now you got to have enough leaves for it to work, because it has to turn the sunshine into apples and sugar. So you don't need to cut them off. Like this branch right here, you could weight it down like that. You could just put a heavy weight on it. You could tie a rope to the ground and put a stub in the ground to hold it. And you could get a branch out of that. But I don't really need a branch, but it would fill in this area. Because some of these have to come out of here because it's too many growing out of this one little place, and it's getting awful congested, and stuff is hitting each other and rubbing each other, and the wind can do a lot of damage when this stuff is blowing around. See, and you know that's not going to help that thing doing that. And anything that's crossing, anything that's touching, see how close that is to that branch? Well, eventually it'll ruin. If I'm going to keep this as a permanent branch for apples for years, it would wear a hole in it and I'd get a disease. So that's going to come out. This isn't doing me any good right here. I'm going to take that out, and I'm going to take that out. I can take this branch off and leave that alone, or I can take this stuff off and let this branch grow out here. It's just what choice do you want. Now if you've got a bunch of spurs growing on your apples, but see this one only has one set of apples on the end of this branch, you might want to cut the end off of this to get some more spurs for the future years. Now when you get when you get apples on these things, there's not going to be that many on this branch, but the apples will weigh it down. And not that you have to think about it in advance, but when this branch here gets a lot of apples on it, it's going to go down. So if you have really low hanging branches coming out of the trunk, when this has a lot of apples on it and hangs down 2 feet from the weight, man, all the rabbits, everything can eat it. But it'll be touching the ground, and you don't want it touching the ground. It will kill the branch because it'll be in contact with the soil and stay moist all the time, and the apples will be laying on the ground. But it will weight itself down. Now when you do prune yours and you get your little branches growing the way you want to, and if they're a little too close together and not quite what you want, you can put spreaders. Now you can just take a piece of wood, cut a notch in each end, you know, trying to show you one. Like if these were real close together and it was a more vertical, you could put a wedge between these two and force them apart like that to get them to grow where you want them to grow. We're talking vertical branches. Most of these are set pretty much where you want them. Now and there is a good crotch angle if you wanted to use that branch, but you'd have to spread it away from the other branch. You don't want these growing apples in a vertical position. So, you know, that would be what you do with your tree. You want to spread these apart to get a decent angle. That's fairly narrow. When they're really narrow, I don't have any like that, but when they're less than 45 degrees, that little seam will be right down the middle. Literally will be right down, that little place where you cut it off will be right down the middle of that thing. And any weight on this will just shear it. But on a when something's coming out 45 degrees, it won't shear. It just will not shear because it's coming out on a nice angle. This is a little crowded. We're gonna have to open it up. But see, that branch is decent. That branch is decent, but if the trunk was still going, this line would come straight down here. And so if this branch came off, it would just tear all this off. Well, most of these are coming out on pretty wide angles. You want 45 or better. I mean, that's almost 90 degrees. So that is like a rock. You could stand on that. That's a little closer together. And see that little seam down through there? This actually, as these get bigger, because eventually they're going to be this size, this will just split. That will split apart. Just from the sheer energy of growing. Because eventually it's going to be this big, and if it hadn't split, it's going to be this big, and eventually it's going to split. But this is a good healthy limb here, and over time I could, that's borderline, but I think I'd just leave it. Crossing buds. Man, I'm getting pollen off these leaves or something. See, these two are together? Well, something's got to be done. Either you got to pull this one out of the way and weigh it down, or something's got to get cut off. See, this is growing into these two branches that you want. It'd be better, since it's going to be more shaded down here and there's no apples on it, to just cut this off and try to get a branch going into that opening. Because this is just going to keep growing, come through here, they're both going to get big, and they'll be laying on each other. Now you could do it that way and weight it down another direction and get it to go out. Now when you cut these things back, if you cut this thing, say I wanted to cut that off right there, that will come out as a new branch. And then it will come out this way, which is what you want. You don't want to cut there, because then that branch will grow back toward the center of the tree. And you want to keep going out. And you got to think about that when you make a cut. See, if I cut it off right there, that will be your new branch. It's dormant now. Once you cut this off, that will come to life. And that branch will come out right here. And you can pick the apples, can't you? But on a branch that's a little more vertical, like if it was up like that, nice branch, and you cut it where that bud right there starts growing, then 2 or 3 years you got a branch going off through the center of your tree. You don't need that. You always cut, most of the time you want this to keep going outward, so you would cut above that fairly close but not touching it, and then your new branch would come out of that.